It's the passion, it's the delusion that unites us all. Andrew Wadden, Ari Daniel here with you. Episode 2 of the podcast, and we're doing this one on Remembrance Day. So before we get into any Leaf talk, Ari, just got to give a shout out to all the soldiers that have fought for our freedom, a debt of gratitude from both Ari and myself for your ultimate sacrifice. So I just thought it would be appropriate for us to do that right off the top of the show. And as they say, Ari, at least we forget, because we're able to do these sort of things because of those that served for us. So thank you to all the soldiers that are currently serving for Canada and for those that lost their lives over the world wars. Hard transition, but we'll do it anyway. 3-game win streak. That is very positive for the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. And if you look at the opponents, all divisional, so you got to love that. But the biggest one being shutting out the Bees, which kicked off the week for the Leafs. Then they followed it up with wins over Detroit in the Hall of Fame game, which is always a special event. And then, of course, beating the Habs on home ice. You got to love that. But let's start with that Bees victory. And we talked about Anthony Stolarz. You've done some TikToks on him, just, claiming that he should be the number one guy for the Leafs. And obviously, I think anyone listening to this is probably agreeing with you on that. So you're not going too far out on a limb, but shutting out Boston, I mean, that's a huge deal. Now, I know Boston's having their struggles right now, but I don't give a shit. Like, anytime you can beat Boston in the regular season, we know what the record's been like over the last little while between the two. Boy, is that a big time feather in your cap, especially for big Anthony Stolarz.
I also think, too, regardless of the fact that Boston has obviously struggled a bit this year, let's be real. In the regular season, those are the Bees are one of the teams that have the Leafs numbered. Kind of like when the Leafs used to go into Buffalo back in the day on a Friday night. That was a guaranteed loss. So, to your point, I do think it was a big game for him and the team. Regardless of their record, they're a hard team to play against. Even harder to not get a single goal scored against you. And, I've made a little bit about the fact that Stolarz should be considered the guy. And at this point, I think it's fair to consider him the guy.
He's picking pucks up with his bare hand right now.
Right.
The confidence levels are through the roof with this guy.
Right. And, we might be fortunate enough to run into a Swayman-Allmark situation where we have two studs, the best problem in the NHL to have, not knowing which one to start, maybe the ability to just go back-to-back or rotate each game until one of them falters. But at this point, I think it's Stoley's net to lose, and when Wall gets his shot, if he doesn't have a stinker, maybe he's a guy who'll go back to, obviously you're going to go back to him on a back-to-back, but maybe he's a guy you give 2 starts in a row to, depending on the opponent and how the team's playing in front of him. But it feels good to think that we might have not yet a bona fide number one, but a guy that has proven in games he could potentially win games for the team down the road that the team had no business winning. We haven't seen one of those games yet where the Leafs shouldn't have lost the game, but they win it because of the goaltending. We saw it against the Leafs, when they got Shesterkin. That was a game that the Leafs probably should have won. The Leafs, we've seen numerous games like that over the years where a big goalie or a nobody goalie manages to steal the game for their team. We don't usually see the Leafs have a guy who can do that, or at least do that on a consistent basis. But if he can do that maybe even once, come April or May, whether it be first round or second round of the playoffs, the whole playoffs have a different outlook with a guy like that.
Where are you at, though, with Stolarz in terms of the game load? I think too many people are making too much out of it. This is a guy that's been around the block. He's been in the NHL. He's been a pro for a very long time. Now, 28 games is his high watermark in terms of the amount that he's played, but he's never really been given, the reins in terms of being a number one goaltender. I mean, I would be okay, if he reaches 50 games this year. It just feels like people are making way too much out of that. Like I said, this guy is not a young rookie. He's a vet, and, this is now his opportunity. Clearly, he's seizing it. Now, there is, the worry that maybe you might overwork him and this, that, and the third. But at the same time, too, the guy he doesn't really, overexert himself in the net. When you're that big, as long as you use your movement properly, you can really sort of or conserve your energy, if you will, as a goaltender by not having to, overexert yourself. And I mean, it helps when you're 6'6" or whatever the hell he is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the best way to describe goalies like that is they're very compact. Their head moves, so their hands move, and so their hips follow. And you're right, that makes their overall game more efficient and perhaps is less strenuous. When it comes to concerns over his workload, I think that the reality is we've already seen the heavier workload. His 28 game max was reached after an 82 game season. He hasn't played this much already previous in his career. He's already proven in this short season that he can handle a heavier workload. He's been handling it. Now it's just a matter of carrying this amount of games consistently throughout the season. I think when it comes to that concern, there's nothing to be concerned about until there's actually something to see that you're concerned about. We haven't seen him falter, and you know the fact is he's gonna have a stinker. And I hope the script on him doesn't flip that quick because it's taken us this long already to say maybe he's the guy or he's the guy. And so I hope he doesn't have a stinker and all of a sudden we're scratching our head wondering if he's the guy. I think that they got to ride this out and they got to ride this out for a while. Unless, of course, we see Wall come in and there's reason to give him more starts. And I'm not talking about, one win against the Detroit team on a Friday night. I mean a couple of games where he's like I've talked about before, making those big saves or routine saves early in periods and late in games that keep his team in the game, much like Stolarz has. But generally, when I think about this team and where they're at right now, I wouldn't consider goaltending a concern.
No.
At all.
No. He's on pace to play 51 games right now. But let's keep in mind, too, that Joseph Woll was hurt the start of the year, so that will probably come down a bit. But I also, too, I know the Habs didn't really test the Leafs that much on Saturday night, but early on in the game, the Habs were kind of pressuring them, and they were within the first 10 minutes or so. There was a lot of D-zone time for the Maple Leafs, and Wall just seemed really calm in the net. I thought he was decent against Montreal, and then as the game unfolded, Montreal basically unfolded themselves. They're awful defensively. I don't know what's going on with that team right now. I know they're young. I know they're trying to make a step. I don't know. They're still in this rebuild. So, they're going to have their flaws, if you will. But, I thought Wall was good. And, as you look ahead of the week, and, I don't want to get too far into things just yet, but they have Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday next week. So with the back-to-back, you'd expect Stolarz will get that we'll get that start. And then, Wednesday will be Woll in Washington. So, if they're in that sort of pace where, it's 2, maybe 4, and then 1 for Wall, I think that's a good sort of workload, if you will, for both goaltenders. And again, good problems to have, like you said, for the Maple Leafs. Just 3 points back of the Panthers right now, too, as we sort of unpack what happened last week. So they're in a good spot. And I like what I've seen from the Leafs so far. Really love the power play. I mean, this is clearly a point that we have to talk about right now. Clicking at 20.8% now. They are tied for 12th in the league. But just those last 3 games at close to 53.9%, 7 for 13, and they're doing all of this without 34.
I mean, talk about a script flipping quick. The power play sure did. And, I think that as teams get better at defending power plays year after year, every team is going to run into struggling on the power play. I think we saw it for a little bit, maybe even, over the course of 2 years in Washington. Not that their power play struggled, but guys seemed to figure out Ovechkin for a little bit, made some adjustments, suddenly he's scoring goals again. I think that with so much game tape and players learning other players' idiosyncrasies, it's easy for a power play to stop producing until they make adjustments, and they don't make adjustments until they stop producing. So there was a problem with their power play for a little bit. They seem to have it figured out. I think it's going to be a game-by-game basis, depending on who they're playing and how that team's defending. But generally, it looks like they found their way. It looks like they're making more plays in front of the net rather than on the perimeter of the circles. Obviously, they have players who can really move the puck in the perimeter, but they also have guys who can play the puck in tight. The skill to be able to play the puck in tight, make 2 or 3 passes between the hash marks and the crease, and they seem to be making their plays there. And I also think that is exactly why we've seen more production offensively from John Tavares. He's always been a guy who can produce in that small space. And so it just seems like they have the perfect cast of guys to run the power play that they're running right now.
Matthew Nice has been fantastic on the power play as well. 3 of his 10 points, I believe, are on the PP this year. He's on pace for like 50 something points. Like, loving what we're seeing from Matt Nice right now. But again, like, this is a good problem to have. I know some people are like, oh, what happens when Matthews gets back? Well, the most elite goal scorer in the league gets inserted back into the power play. Like, I'm sorry, like, that seems to be a good thing to me. And I know that they've had their struggles with him in the lineup, but I'll go with history over, a small sample size right now. And history has told us that when 34 is in the lineup, that PP gets humming. So again, good problems to have for the Leafs. This is a bad problem though. And we really liked what we've been seeing out of Max Pacioretty. Goes down with an injury against his old team on Saturday night. Looks like it's a hamstring injury, as we know. The Leafs are never going to tell you that. But Brad Treliving did speak to the media. We are recording this on Monday, of course, on Remembrance Day. And he mentioned that it was initially thought to be, worse, but it just looks like it's going to be something that it is going to be, he'll be coming back, but it's several weeks as opposed to maybe, perhaps done for the year. So I think that's good in terms of, an update for Max Pacioretty. But the bad thing is that he was playing really well for the Leafs. And it wasn't just, the Max Pacioretty of old, who was obviously an offensive dynamo. This is a guy that seems to be, looking at the point he's at in his career and understanding that, he's got to change his game a little bit. And from what we saw from Patches so far, really like it. And it's unfortunate that the Leafs are going to be out without him for a while, but, it's, I guess, next man up at this point.
It's unfortunate, but at the same time, good timing. We've talked quite a little bit in the past about the fact that the Leafs are going to run into some cap issues with certain guys coming back into the lineup. But I've also said the inevitability is somebody is going to go down with an injury. And so he's not a key guy, and he's a guy you'd probably like to have in your lineup, especially the way he's playing right now. But at the same time, this gives them a chance to figure out what pieces they have and what they can do with those pieces if they don't fit into this puzzle. But they don't know until those guys get back into the lineup. Of course, I'm talking about Dewar and Hakanpää. I think that there's also a possibility that as the NHL evolves, that we see injuries like this with guys like this go down, and do they perhaps go on to a mini Kucherov Island for a couple weeks? In the case of Max
Robidoff, because Robidoff Island is lost. Like, we can't find it anywhere. It's like in the Bermuda Triangle somewhere, and it's lost forever. But Kucherov Island, that's a better one to be on, I suppose.
Right. And so I'm not saying this happened here. I think Patches is a guy that they're going to want to have in the lineup. But I could also see an NHL where, a third-line veteran goes down. It's maybe a day-to-day injury, but, you can explain to the veteran what they have going on with the lineup, what they have going on with the cap situation. And, is he okay taking some load management but on the IR for a couple games in order for his team to figure out what they have in terms of the other depth on the lineup? I'm not saying that's what they did here. But
no, this situation, if you got the GM coming out saying it's going to be several weeks, he's going to be placed on long-term injury reserve. That's just a fact at that point, right? So, but you spoke about the IR, and that's where Auston Matthews finds himself right now. And as I said, as we record this, being Monday, November 11th, it is not expected that he's going to play in the Battle of Ontario on Tuesday against Ottawa. I would assume that he wouldn't make the trip to Washington. If you're not going to play Tuesday, why send him on Wednesday? Why not get him ready for the big one on Saturday night, where Connor McDavid makes his only appearance in what is essentially his hometown? He's a Newmarket kid, so that's basically GTA, right? So, that'll be a big game, and Matthews returning that night, I think that sort of sets it up a little bit better for a big tilt against the Oilers.
And I know the Oilers struggled a little bit off the top of the season. They always do, but I think it's fair to say that they're a top-tier team, evidenced by the fact
absolutely.
Yeah. And so this is one of, regardless of, the geographical situation and the fact that, the Oilers are the Oilers, I think this is another big game for the Leafs in terms of determining how they size up to the league's best. Because like we talked about, Boston, are they really there this year? Huge win. Don't get me wrong. Huge win. But they need more wins, or they need more tests against the league's top teams right now.
And honestly, too, like, Boston's just they're not the same defensively this year. And there's something going on there with Monty and the players. Like, I mean, he's on thin ice right now. So, yeah, to put Boston in that upper echelon right now, they would be there on reputation really alone, I think.
Right. And we saw a good outing last week against Winnipeg. It's possible
Fantastic.
it's possible that they become one of these Leafs teams for the first time maybe in the Core 4 era, which is they really bring it against the best teams in the league, but they might struggle against, Columbus on a Tuesday night or something like that. They just don't get up for those games. But so far, when they play the league's best, we even saw it when they lost, when they got Shesterkin against the Rangers. They played well that night, probably deserved to win the game. And I think that looking towards the playoffs, these are all good signs. The fact that the goaltending hasn't struggled, we haven't face-palmed ourselves at many defensive plays, if any. We haven't looked to the defense after a game and said, if the defense were better, we would have really won that game. This team, we've talked about this being a dress rehearsal for the playoffs. If the playoffs were to start tomorrow, I'd be more than confident in this team winning the first round. Maybe a little too much to say they might win the second round, but, I'm not worried about them winning a playoff round, which every other year they go in and whoever they're going against, unless it's like Columbus in the play-in round, I'm usually worried that they might not get out of that round.
Yeah, how Columbus work out?
I can point to going in. Sorry?
So how did Columbus work out, by the way?
Right, exactly. So, I do think that this team, I realize we're just a little bit over an 8 into the season, but I can't sit here and think, if the trade deadline were tomorrow, the Leafs got to do something in order to do something with the playoffs. I just don't see that. I think it's a well put together lineup, and credit to the management. I think coming into this season, we had more questions about how this team would perform compared to any other season. Maybe because of their past and the fact that, for the most part, the team has been constructed the same. But I've said this before. I think that, whether it's hockey or life, you need to lose in order to figure out how to win. And they've done a lot of losing.
Oh, lots of that. Yeah. You got plenty of losing. Done with the losing. More wins, please, especially in the playoffs. If Matthews doesn't return on Saturday, though, at that point, you're looking at 7 games missed. I don't want to get too concerned just yet. Let's see how the week plays out. But if they have an awful week and he still doesn't return after Saturday, then I think it's a different podcast for us next week. But we'll unpack that when we get there. Connor Dewar looks like he's going to make his debut this season with the Leafs against the Sens. He's been activated, but Yanni Hakanpää has still not been medically cleared, although he's been practicing with the team. Looks like it's just a matter of time before he gets activated. The Leafs placed Matt Benning on waivers today, which, I'm sure they tried to do their best to try to shop him around the league, but with that extra year on his contract, I think it's 1.25, teams, they just don't want to bite on that. They don't want to bite on the term. Right shot guys, clearly NHL level, whether he's, in your bottom pair or maybe your 7th guy or whatever. So I expect Benning to clear waivers today. We'll see, but, regardless of what happens with Benning, that'll open up some cap space. And then Hakanpää, we would expect to get inserted into the lineup. I wonder if they'll just wait till Saturday night with Hakanpää as well, just with the back-to-back and the travel, whether it even makes sense. But, again, these are good problems for the Leafs because it's now showing that this depth this year, and as I mentioned earlier, like next man up, well.
Yeah, and, this is, I have said before, this is better than them going to the Marlies, calling up a guy who doesn't have much NHL experience and giving him his shot, which I do believe is important at times. But this is generally for the team better. This guy has NHL experience. He has playoff experience. We know what he's made of. Maybe we haven't seen fully what his potential can bring him in the team. But, you're not sitting there face palming yourself going like, oh, God, this team doesn't have enough depth night after night. And that's especially evidenced by the fact that Auston Matthews has been out of the lineup. I say that, but at the same time, we have an embarrassment of riches up front. And so one guy missing, whether it be, Auston Matthews, Mitch Marner, William Nylander, one guy missing shouldn't make us sweat anyway, especially with the way this team is constructed with that top-heavy presence. One guy shouldn't make the whole team collapse, especially in the game of hockey where you have 4 lines rolling, and they definitely haven't done that so far.
Yeah, and I guess the beauty of what Tree Living has done really with this roster is they've always had the big boys up front. It's a matter of having those depth guys down below that ultimately, you win with, especially in the playoffs, right? Like when you sometimes those top six guys just sort of get, neutralized by one another. It's those bottom six guys, at least in the forward group, that really step up and sort of, can be the separator. Look at the Florida Panthers over the years, look at Tampa over the years as well. So I think Trey Living's done a great job with that. And you mentioned, like being NHL, quality players that you are calling up or inserting into the lineup. I think that's a big deal for the Maple Leafs. Calle Jarnkrok had a setback as well. So, you talk about the depth sort of needing to be there with Jarnkrok having this setback. Looks like he's going to go see a specialist in New York. Kevin McGran from the Toronto Star is stating that it's a sports hernia, as the Leafs are not going to confirm any of that. But, I don't know if you know about a sports hernia. I've never had to deal with one, but I know others that have, and they can be a pain in the ass, really. He played preseason games. Obviously, something aggravated it there. It can be something that we might not see Calle Jarnkrok in the regular season, Ari. That's not so much of a hot take from me, really. I think that, you want to get this right. And, perhaps Calle Jarnkrok can be, there late in the season or be ready for the playoffs. But again, just having, depth to be able to, weather that storm is definitely a good thing for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you. When I saw that injury report, I thought to myself the exact same thing, that we might not see him this regular season. And if he, he makes his way into the lineup for one or two games in the playoffs, we'll know what we have with him. I don't think this team is going to struggle without him. I don't think at any point so far we're gonna look to ourselves and go, "Gee, I wish Calle Jarnkrok in the lineup." And I also think that's, for whatever reason, given David Kampf a little bit of a boost. He seems to play with more confidence with the puck, especially that rush play the other night. He's with Marner. And, when you're not worried about being taken out of the lineup or perhaps shipped out of town, that's going to have an impact on your play, which is also why I think this team has been notoriously bad as the trade deadline approaches, because a lot of them are worried about being shipped off. But like I said, if the playoffs were on the way next week, I don't think that this team would be making very many changes. They seem to be gelling well together, and we've seen the results on paper.
Absolutely. Well, let's see what kind of results they'll get as the week ahead. And we've unpacked a bit of it already, but Tuesday versus Ottawa will be the first battle of Ontario this season. The Sens are a point back as we record this of a second wild card. Ari, I would love to see the Sens get into the playoffs this year. I like their young core that they've sort of put together. I'm a big Travis Green guy. Those that know me, know us really, know that we live in Vancouver. I have covered the Canucks for years. I've been in the dressing room many times, especially over the Travis Green era. Got to know Greener a little bit. He could be a hard nose, but good dude on the surface as well. And good to see him sort of leading that Sens team. Hey, how much would you give to have a Battle of Ontario, perhaps in the first round? If the Leafs can, I don't know if Ottawa can get themselves into that 3-hole in the Atlantic. I still feel like Boston or Tampa will be able to take that, with Toronto and Florida. I don't think the Leafs are going to catch Florida. Florida just looks like they're continuing to just keep chugging along. But, so maybe this is wishful thinking, but those battles of Ontario back in the day in the playoffs, I mean, obviously if you're a Leafs fan, you look at them a lot more fondly than the Sens fans will, but it'd be great to get back to that. But regardless, it would be just amazing to see Ottawa get back into the playoffs this year. But before they got to get there, they got to win a bunch of hockey games and see if they can, beat the Leafs, in Toronto on Tuesday, which is always going to be a fun time when you're facing off against the Sens.
And whether it's Ottawa or another team, I think that whether it's this year or, years to come, the Leafs are going to play teams like that in the first round or second round that are younger and not as tough to play against as some of their other opponents in past years. And it might be hard to believe, but those are going to be series where I think you're going to see the Leafs, believe it or not, bully their opponents. They're going to be more physical. They're going to be more exactly. I think that, if the Leafs were to play the Senators this year, you'd see a Leafs team that is bullying their opponents in the first round. They would out-hit them. They would be tougher and they'd be rougher, especially with the coaching staff in place now. And I think, too, that'll be a chance to look back and go, this is why the Leafs didn't have success in the previous years. We all know they were the team that got bullied. And we're going to see a different response from this team after whistles, in between plays, before face-offs, where they're figuring out ways to get in the heads of other opponents. I'm not saying it's going to be a team of Brad Marchands, but this is a highly experienced team. You can even tell how experienced they are sometimes by some of these games they're playing in between whistles. I realize it might be hard for everyone to see, but before face-offs right now, when they're getting called on penalties, a lot of them who know they're getting called on the penalty get off the ice real quick, then pretend they're like, me? I didn't know I was the one getting the penalty. They do this on certain plays where, you know, the penalty kill needs a little bit extra time. They want their refs to maybe discuss it a little bit longer and perhaps give a coincidental minors or whatever the case may be. Those are small signs of an extremely experienced team that some of this veteran presence, obviously, that they acquired in the offseason brings, but also these guys who we've been watching for years are now veterans and they know how to run the game. And I think that'll make a huge difference come April.
Yeah, and just look at some of the sandpaper or the guys that are supplying some of the sandpaper right now. You know, like Pacioretty, he's playing a bit of a different game out there. I'm not saying that he's, you know, Brad Marchand and things as well, but he's out there being a little bit annoying. OEL, I don't think OEL had a single body check when he played in Vancouver. Like, he just was a different player, and obviously he was more of an offensive player when he played down in the desert. But the last couple of years, and maybe he learned this from, you know, being a Panther last year as well, like, we're seeing a lot of different game from OEL. Love that he's bringing the sandpaper. By the way, too, I'm selling the Ottawa Senators a little bit short right now because they are just 2 points out of third in the Atlantic, and they own 2 games in hand on Boston. Now, we are only, as you mentioned, just over an eighth of the way through the season, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but they're in that race right now when it comes to that 3-hole in the Atlantic. Tampa just 1 point ahead of them. They have the second wild card at the moment. So, yeah, this is going to be a good one on Tuesday. Looking forward to the first battle of Ontario this season. Wednesday against Washington, the Caps have been unreal. Ari, just third place right now in the Metro, you know, tied with the Leafs in terms of points. They got 2 games in hand on the Leafs as well. But Ovi going into the season, chasing, you know, Gretzky's 894 career goals. And a lot of us thought, all right, it's going to take him 2 seasons to get there. The guy's got 10 goals in 14 games, Ari. He's on pace for 59 goals. Now, I don't think he's going to score 59. I don't even think he's going to score 50. But to say, you know, 45 or so, I mean, the pace that he's on right now, giddy up, and he only needs, 31 more to tie the great one right now. So, I don't know about you. Like, obviously, I want the Leafs to win that game, but I'd like to see a goal from Ovi, though.
And the Stars always score against the Leafs. They always rip it up against the Leafs. Crosby always scores. Ovechkin always scores. And I think that over the past couple of years, we've seen big games from some older players when they're perhaps in some of their last seasons. Johnny Quick had a classic Johnny Quick start against the Leafs last year. Like I said, Crosby always has big games against the Leafs. If Ovechkin tees one up from the top of the circle on the power play, I'm all for it.
How does I've heard others talking about this, so it's not really an original thought, but how does Alex Ovechkin continue to get away with the clapper from the half wall that nobody seems to be able to stop? Like, at some point, why don't you just put a man just directly on him, right? Like, it's just ridiculous. But again, like I said, would love to see the Leafs go through Washington with 2 points. But if Ovi's got to get a couple of cookies, perhaps, I'm okay with that. Because I want to see the Grade A do it this year. I think it's a fantastic record for him to be hunting. And, I mean, all-time goal scoring, like, when he came into the league, like, did you ever think that he would be able to do that? Like, I knew he was going to be one of the best goal scorers of all time. Didn't think it was going to be quite like this. So let's see if the Grade 8 can continue to be good against the Maple Leafs. Lastly, Saturday night, we talked about it. McDavid and the boys are in town against the Maple Leafs. Alone time that the Oilers will make their way through Hogtown. Always a great atmosphere. And, you know, when Connor McDavid's in town, it's always worth the price of admission.
Totally. I think that, like I talked about at the beginning, this is going to be one of those games where the Leafs really see where they measure up. We've also seen some, like, embarrassing Leafs Oilers matchups over the years. The one that comes to mind is when he dangled Riley late in the game a couple of years back. Man.
That is on highlight reel. That's going to be on highlight reels for the next, 50 years or so. That was definitely, yeah. Morgan Riley does not want that on his mixtape. That's for damn sure. But
Yeah.
Connor McDavid might lead with that one. And considering all the things that he has done in the league, possibly might be the best move ever by McDavid. And, there might be others right now that are, come on, man, don't you remember this, and that? No, but I do remember the Morgan Rielly one very well.
Hopefully they'll be teammates in a couple years when McDavid signs back home.
Oh, boy, here we go. We'll end with that hot take right there. So the Leafs, like I mentioned at the start of the show, 3-game winning streak. Let's see how they can ride things out with 2 at home, 1 at Ottawa and Edmonton on Tuesday, Saturday, and then that quick little roadie down to Washington on Wednesday. All right, for Ari Daniel, I'm Andrew Wadden. This has been The Passion. It's the delusion that unites us all. See you again next week.